Welcome everyone, I'm Pepe. I am a poet from Santa Ana, California, and today we're going to write poems about fruit trees of the Americas. What you're going to need to get started is a pencil. You could use a pen, you could use a marker, whatever you have at your disposal, colored pencils. You're also going to need a paper. You can use 2 papers, you can use 3 papers, however many papers you want, because it's your poem. So go ahead and get your writing weapons, and I'll meet you back here so we can learn more about how to write our own poems. So now that we have our poetry weapons at our disposal, we're ready to write some poems. But we need to learn a little bit more about what poetry is. Poetry is a creative way of expressing ourselves through words. We can have a lot of fun inventing new ways of looking at the world. In Nahuatl, one of the indigenous cultures of Mexico, there is a tradition called In Xochitl in Cuicatl. It's a poetry tradition that translates to flor y canto, or flower and song. There are over 81 indigenous cultures in Mexico. Each of them has their own oral and poetry traditions, so you can have a lot of fun learning about those. They often take place during wedding ceremonies, coming of age ceremonies, and other important milestones in our lives. You might be wondering, so who can be a poet? Anybody can be a poet. You can be a poet, your uncle can be a poet, your sister can be a poet. Anybody can be a poet, especially you. Alright, so since we're going to write about fruit trees, we have to think about them, right? Can you think of any fruit trees that you've seen around you? Great. So I know that when I like to walk around Santa Ana a lot, I tend to see lots of different fruit trees, and we're pretty known in Orange County for our orange trees, which still hang out with us today. Have you seen any guayaba fruit trees or guava fruit trees? They smell really good, and it's one of my favorite things about them. Have you also seen nísperos or loquats? They're really yummy and have lots of seeds to surprise you with on the inside. You can see them all over Santa Ana, and even though loquats are originally from Asia, they've been hanging out with us in North America for quite some time now. In order to write our poems, we're going to use some basic senses, right? Basic sensorial descriptions. So can you think of your 5 senses? What are some of your favorite 5 senses? That's awesome. I already told you I really like to smell guayabas. They smell so sweet, I can smell them down the street. Our 5 senses are seeing, touching, smelling, tasting, and hearing. So now think of a fruit tree that you really like. Got it? Okay, now try to write as many sensorial descriptions using these 5 basic senses as you can about this fruit tree. If you need more time, go ahead and pause the video because I'm only going to give you a moment. Alright, so now that you have some of your descriptions of those 5 senses around your fruit tree, we're going to get into some other poetry tools. I'm going to need this board for them. So one tool that we can use as a building block for figurative language, or it's another way of saying our creative ways of describing the world in a non-literal sense. One tool that I really like is metaphors. Do you know what a metaphor is? So metaphors is one way that we can make comparisons and connections between some things that might be unlikely. So what is an example of a metaphor? I'm going to write one for you right now. Alright, so this is my metaphor that I made for you all. Guava trees glowing, that's my pot of gold. This is a metaphor because I'm calling the guava trees my pot of gold, but I don't mean it in a literal sense. They're still quite literally trees, but to me, I treasure them so much, so they are my pot of gold. Do you see how that is figurative language and not literal? So now that you have an example of what a metaphor is, why don't you try it yourself? Go ahead and pause the video if you need more time. For our next tool, our next poetry tool or literary device, we are going to use alliteration. Alliteration is when we use the repetition of sounds either within a line, multiple words in that line, or within a stanza or a section of the poem. When we use alliteration within a section of a poem, that means that multiple lines may have sounds that repeat within each other. That creates a sort of rhythm or a relationship of sound between these lines and between these words. Alliteration is one of our favorite tools in Chicanx poetry. Alright, so here's the example that I wrote for you all about alliteration. Walking down the streets of Santa Ana, nose getting sweet scents of the guayabas. So you can notice I used guayabas in Spanish. It's okay to use Spanglish. It's another very important tradition of Chicanx poetry. Chicanx is our way of being inclusive. Instead of using Chicana or Chicano, we're more inclusive of genders by using Chicanx or Chicane. So what's going on with the alliteration? We can see walking down the streets, S, of Santa Ana, another S, nose getting sweet scents, more sounds of the guayabas. Now you can notice I didn't underline nose, right? Part of it's because it's not in the front of the beginning of the word. But the most important reason why I didn't underline it is because it doesn't add to the rhythm because it's a different sound, z, nose, than streets or Santa Ana. Does that make more sense? So now that you know what alliteration is and you have a little bit of an example, go ahead and try it out for yourself. Alright poets, now you are armed and equipped with your poetry weapons as well as some really neat literary devices. Now that you know how to build these, it's time to put it all together. Think about your poem as a house that you're building brick by brick, line by line. You are the master creator of your poem. You have some big decisions to make. Which sensor description goes first? How do you want your poem to end? Take some time to read it out loud and find the order that you like best. All right, poets, so now that you've created a poem of your very own and you found the order that works best for you, what's next? Well, share your poem with other people. You want to share this poem with people who care about you, people who are your friends, whoever you like. And if you want to try writing again, come back to this video with your friends, your caregivers, and your family. I even have a video up in Spanish, so you can watch this workshop with your abuelitas.